Jane Holland, costume designer for Cowboy Bebop, coming to Netflix in November. A ragtag crew of bounty hunters chases down the galaxy's most dangerous criminals. They'll save the world for the right price. Jane, this show is obviously based on a legendary anime series of the same name. When you were brought on to be the costume designer, I guess, where did you start to do the live action version and come up with the looks of the characters, for the adaptation?
Well, I have to say that I hadn't seen the anime, so I came in fresh, which is kind of good. The first thing that I like to do is to read a script for just the script without having to, having other sort of noise in my head from something else. So I read the script cold. It was great. Like it's written with such great energy and really cool turns of phrase. And so, that really interested me. And then from there, I looked at the anime and my gosh, it opened a world to me. It's just such a cool storytelling, there's this kind of crazy kind of action that then sort of like suddenly sort of turns into some kind of like surreal moment. And, there's sort of like really breaks a lot of conventions and that amazing soundtrack. So, there was sort of just, it was easy for me really as soon as I sort of seen that source material to really, really be interested in doing this project. The creative scope of it is something quite extraordinary. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really fun. I guess picking back off of what you just said there, I guess like the show has so many fans. Obviously, like I myself also was not super familiar with the anime project, but I'd heard of it, of course. And I was just like, obviously the fans have such they have an expectation of what the characters maybe would look like. I guess for you as a costume designer, how do you make sure you're like, obviously like making your own imprint on the costumes while at the same time maybe, making sure that it is in keeping with what maybe longtime fans of the property would want to see?
Yeah, I think it's really important, and also with just such rich source material. So it really was something that we referenced a lot. But I guess the whole spirit of the series, and also because you're switching from anime to live action, there's a whole lot of stuff that comes with that springboards you into another world. So there's a lot of world building to do. There's a whole kind of re-looking at things. All of the proportions and shapes are quite different with human beings. There's a really sort of strong design process that you go through to try and get the essence and the sort of real feel and intention of characters that are in the anime that then kind of extrapolate and move and expand. So it's kind of like a springboard rather than being a slave to the anime. But, just a wealth of material. There's just such a mixture of stuff in there that is really cool. There's the Japanese style of storytelling. There's a really strong sort of Asian aesthetic that runs through. And then this harvesting of Americana and amazing sort of like just depth of music references. So there's a lot of stuff to get your ideas going and then sort of draw the threads together. So yeah, in terms of fans, I can't sort of predict what people are going to, how they're going to react. I just, sort of put everything that I can into it, have the best of intentions and really try and sort of make it as complex and, sort of depth and kind of interest, for people to find new things in it. There's a lot of detail that I hope will become as intriguing and, will kind of just build in this extrapolation of the world rather than a literal representation of the anime.
Yeah, you mentioned like a couple of things in there. You mentioned the scope of it and the depth of the Americana, I think you called it. I've been watching the show. It's like, to me, I was like, it's like, you're picking up like Western iconography or like dystopian science fiction, film noir, obviously. I guess as a costume designer, can you talk about like how exciting that is to get to blend those genres all in the same show, and like with the same characters even? I think it's just such a great, mix.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, yeah, we called it mashup. You know, there's this real mashup in there. I mean, I call it the bebop twist. That I was always looking for the bebop twist for everything. But really, I think the thing that anchored it for me was just, you know, sort of was bebop itself, like looking at bebop, the movement of bebop, what that jazz movement was, which was sort of like breaking restraint. It was kind of new ways of doing things. It was sort of like a real freedom and improvisation. So it's like, you know, that musical reference was something that I found really kind of anchored it, and that gave me something to understand. And the other thing that I kind of found really useful is, you know, there's sort of like something to do with a lot of, you know, sort of Japanese design and that is kind of like bringing different threads together. I mean, if you look at, you know, Japanese fashion design or Japanese tailoring, there's often sort of, you know, some kind of break of convention or some kind of really interesting quirk to it that is, you know, because there is this kind of like mixture of culture. So those are things that I found really valuable and really useful. And it's almost like sort of like finding a discord, but then finding the twist that kind of makes it sing. That's kind of how I felt about a lot of it. It's quite retro in lots of ways, you know. I mean, the feel of the anime has this retro feel. So, you know, in the background particularly, you know, I used a lot of vintage stuff, but I didn't stay in an era. It was a matter of, you know, sort of taking different things, putting them together, and then kind of just finding that thing that made it sing. Really fun, lots of fun.
Yeah, the background where it's like the world looked, like you said before, the world building is so big and the show has got such a massive scope. It does feel like, you know, when they're popping around to different locations and stuff, it just does feel like it's so built out based on like you said, like the background actors and everybody in their costumes. It really looks like they're in these places because of that. And I think it's like really a tribute to your work there. Are you talking about the characters? I mean, Spike Spiegel obviously has such like a great look, and the John Cho is so awesome on show, and I just love his headphones. Can you talk a little about like finding like the, you know, like getting the right look for his character and like the headphone, like the whole thing, obviously.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, it's such a kind of core, obviously, that the character of Spike Spiegel, and you know, I mean, it's a signature costume. So a signature costume has to do a lot of work, and you know, he sort of like has this kind of like really kind of nonchalant sort of street style, like really kind of cool, like this sort of really cool energy. But then he'll kind of go into some kind of crazy fight with high kicks and spins and what have you. So, you know, that suit had to do a lot of work. Also, it's pretty kind of unusual when you actually start drilling down into what it is in the anime. It's a single lapel. It's kind of got a bit of a crossover at the front. There's little tabs that tie it. There's sort of a bit of an Asian feel to it, but there's kind of quite an 80s feel to it. So really it was sort of finding a way into it. And basically, you know, it's a double-breasted suit that's kind of like a really slim cut and tailored, like just tailored. Yeah, and the lapel just has this sort of like wonderful little flick where it kind of disappears from the lapel and then sort of like, you know, to form that single lapel. That kind of detail was just it was sort of a way of finding something that actually really worked as a garment and a style. And, you know, John has a lot to do with that. Fabric choice, but tailoring and also detail. Like, you know, we, I had a jeweler and, you know, we made the buttons. The buttons have got the kanji symbol for water engraved in them because water is part of the Spike sort of character backstory. It's kind of part of his fight style, fight like water. There's sort of it's an analogy or a metaphor that kind of runs through. So there's details like that. And trophy buckles, because it's Cowboy Bebop, it was like, okay, you know, my thing is going to be trophy buckles. So we kind of created like fine jewellery, trophy buckles for a number of the characters that kind of encompassed that sort of, you know, metaphor for their character. So his has got that same kanji symbol for for water, but then it's got like a Japanese wave. So it's got this powerful imagery, quite beautiful. And then the lining, which is secret, it's only the actor really knows. You never see the lining probably, or the pattern is so small you wouldn't see what it is. But the lining is printed with like tiny roses that are falling through the lining, and the rose is a metaphor that runs right through the anime, and it's so symbolic of his heartbreak and his lost love. So that's kind of wrapped around him. So I kind of tried to find depth and bring depth to something that he had to wear every day, and that sort of has to go right through this world at all these different environments, and sort of like something that that could respond to all the challenges of the practicalities of filming.
Yeah, it's really great. Cowboy Bebop coming to Netflix in November. Jane Holland, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Eimer Ni Mhaoldomhnaigh, the costume designer for Foundation on Apple TV Plus, a complex saga of humans scattered on planets throughout the galaxy, all living under the rule of the Galactic Empire, is the brief synopsis, but it's a massive show, massive in scale and scope, based on the Isaac Asimov novel. I guess, Eimer, I wanted to start there. I've seen people describe this as maybe almost an possibly unfilmable book. Obviously, we know that that's not true because you made the show. But I mean, when you were approached for this, where do you first start thinking about the costumes for this?
Well, I did episodes 2 to 10. So, I started working at the same time as Kurt and Bart, who did episode 1. So we kind of worked together. And, it was, I suppose for me, I normally work on period films or more contemporary films, but a lot of period work. So I really kind of relished the challenge of doing something different. I mean, it's kind of interesting when you hear other costume designers talk. I sometimes feel we all kind of say the same thing over and over, but it is true. You are always looking for a challenge. And, Foundation is to use a much worn, turn of phrase, it is epic on every kind of scale. So I just kind of decided, the best kind of way to approach it is just the way I do all my work. Just read the script and just try, I think everything really needs to be kind of character based. That's always really important for me, that the costumes are relevant to the character and what the character is doing and where the character is. And even if that's an imagined world, you still have to bring the characterization into the costume so that when people, see whoever it is, if it's Lee Pace or Clark Peters, that they can relate to this person and the costume is giving you some information about that character. So really it's just kind of, I kept my normal kind of working methods and just tried to apply it to a very exciting world, which was going to give me a lot of opportunities to be extra creative, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I was reading one of the reviews I saw compared to like the costumes to like something you would see at like the Met Gala, or so they're so like it's like very creative fashion and stuff. You mentioned like you had done like period pieces and more contemporary things, and when you're costume designing for something that's set in the future, that's even hard to comprehend. I mean, how do you how do you think about how fashion and costumes will evolve in future? I guess how does that play into it?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose what the thing about Foundation, it is science fiction, it's futuristic, whatever you want to call it. It's not the worlds aren't peopled by robots. Now, taking Demerzel out of that equation, but I mean, most of the character, even Demerzel has a very, is a very surprising robot. She has very human feelings and emotions, and we kind of really identify with her. But it's not like R2-D2 or, kind of people kind of walking around like that or creating creatures. So I really felt, there was this, because it has that human element to it, that once that is there, you're really kind of talking about, like something like Terminus, when they go on the slow ship and they arrive on Terminus, and that's it's this very barren landscape. So you're immediately thinking about clothing that has to be practical and durable, and I'm always trying to kind of think as well, how is the audience going to relate to the story and to the characters, and how do the characters become believable? So the world that the Cleons inhabit, Trantor, is kind of your very futuristic world. It's very high tech. It's kind of what we imagine, be it right or wrong, the future might be. But then, with something like Terminus, it's a bit more like kind of a Mad Max kind of type of a world. There's a struggle to find water. There's a struggle to find power. It's people repurposing and, just kind of trying to be. It's very relatable to kind of what's happening now in the world, with people much more interested in the environment and, repurposing everything and giving everything a new life. So again, it's about the script and the story that is all the time playing into the costumes and how the costumes are created.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned like I was looking at your CV. You've worked on so many adaptations, or like a lot of different ones, and like you said, like more maybe period pieces. And this is obviously an adaptation as well. When you're like, as a costume designer, do you go back and like read the book and see how like what the descriptions of characters' clothing is like? How do you go about for an adaptation like this, or in general? I guess I was just curious about that.
Yeah, well, that is. It's definitely the thing you imagine that you should do. And of course, it is the thing I immediately did, because when I told my husband, he was like, "Oh my God, Isaac Asimov." And I was going, "Oh my God, who is he?" And he was like, "Oh my God, he's amazing." So it seemed that all my male friends knew who Isaac Asimov and Foundation was. And I was really slightly deeply embarrassed, if you can say slightly and deeply embarrassed all at the one time. But I immediately downloaded it onto my Kindle and started reading it. And then I was on a Zoom call with David Goyer, and he said, "Don't read it. The scripts are going to be different. You're just going to get confused." And I said, "Oh my God, he knows me so well already. I'm going to start getting confused. Who's doing what, when, what episode are we on?" So yeah, I did read the first book, and then, like in the original book, the lead character is male. There's so many different things, So as they say, I parked the books. I walked away from the books. And I said, I just need to get to know the scripts, Maybe I should read the books now.
Maybe, yeah. Why now that it's almost done. Can you mentioned like Lee Pace and stuff. I think the brothers and the way their costumes look is so. I just love that. I love how they look in their chambers or whatever, and then like obviously out in public, there's like they have like a different view and a different like look and presentation, I guess would maybe be the word. Can you talk about like working on that, like making how you kind of like honed in on like how they would look in public versus private, I guess.
Yeah, well, as I was saying, like, Kurt and Bart did episode 1, right. So that the costumes that I did for the Cleons, really kind of starts in episode 2. So I suppose the main ones are for Terrence Mann's character as Dusk. So when he dies, the Ascension robes. And they're really, if you look at those, they are very much kind of based on sort of religious iconography. So this whole idea of the Cleons as being almost, a religious cult, that people kind of having to obey them, people saying whatever the Cleons say is right, a little bit like Catholicism and the Pope, those kind of references. And then, with when we go to the Maiden and Lee Pace's character Day, and he decides he has to walk the spiral, so the clothes, that is very, I'm not obsessing about, I'm not some crazy religious fanatic, but, that is quite biblical too, as it happens. But we wanted that to be just the simplest costume that it could be, because we have become so used to seeing the Cleons in pomp and splendor, looking very regal, looking extremely powerful. So that by the time, they go to the Maiden, we just wanted to strip everything back. And so that so that Day, by the time he gets to the end of the spiral, I mean, he is, when he gets into the water, he is naked, but he has been totally pared down in every sense of the word. His costume, it starts out as something that can cover him. He loses that. He's in a loincloth. It ends up being dirty and tatters. And so it's really, again, it's that whole, what is, it's the characterization. Where is the character going? What is happening to the character? What's going through his head? That's, so he just ends up in this terribly simple costume, which completely contrasts to everything that he is and wears when he is on Trantor.
Right.
And it's very symbolic.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, just briefly before we wrap up, you mentioned the religious iconography and stuff. Was that something you, and how you're you joke, and you're not a religious fanatic, but I'm is that something that you kind of just were did you kind of not stumble into that, but was that surprising that you ended up doing, it was maybe repeating itself, or that you were noticing that as a connective tissue?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted, so for Dusk, for the Ascension Chamber, and when he dies, I wanted it to kind of take on this very ceremonial kind of a role to it, and I just kind of kept going back to that sort of the Vatican, and when you think the robes that they wear in the Vatican, I mean, you can look at paintings from hundreds of years ago, they really haven't changed very much. And I just thought it would be really interesting to kind of carry that into the future and kind of have a sort of a slightly, futuristic sci-fi kind of feel to it, and that, we all, when I say we all go into the future, we'll all be dead. But when we do, things just aren't all going to change. We're going to still, hopefully, I hope we're going to still keep on to some of our whatever we have from the 20th century. It's all still going to be there, and I just wanted to kind of show some of those tropes are still going to exist, but in a futuristic fashion.
Right. Eimer Ni Mhaoldomhnaigh, costume designer for Foundation on Apple TV Plus right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sharon Long, costume designer for The Great Season 2. A royal woman living in rural Russia during the 18th century is forced to choose between her own personal happiness and the future of Russia when she marries an emperor. Sharon, you were new to the show in Season 2. I guess, where did you start? Where did you want to start with the costumes when you were brought on after, obviously, the successful Season 1?
Well, I suppose I had to learn all about the 18th century, obviously, and Russia. So lots of research, and then look at what, for me, I was going to take into Season 2 and how I was going to change it. So that was kind of where I started, but a backbone of information, and then sort of looking at what to sort of work with.
Right. So I want to talk about that. The show obviously is a, very, I would say maybe subversive, or it's obviously is a historical, there's historical basis and reality, but also it takes a lot of creative licenses. I guess, how do you balance your research and obviously the fidelity to that era of costumes with do you try to subvert it all for the tone of the show, I guess?
I think I always feel if you don't actually anchor something properly in your research, it sort of goes too far. I wanted to, although I think played around quite a lot with the period, I hope that it still reads as mid sort of 18th century, and you've created a little world within history, if you like. That and also I do feel the more that you do research, the more that you find things you never expected to find. So your kind of initial idea of a period of history changes as you do more and more research, and there are things that are beautiful and surprising. And because we were doing a satirical piece, I could probably cheat and bring in a few things that made it exciting and sort of are really interesting and sometimes funny.
Can you talk a little about, you mentioned like what was, when you were doing your research, like what was surprising, I guess, that you found, like, or that you were maybe not expecting to find about, like, 18th century Russia?
The kind of, and actually I didn't know that much about 18th century Russian or Russian sort of folk costume. I didn't know that much about it, and it is quite fascinating. And although it doesn't play a huge part in the court, it plays a big part in the coronation dress. And because we got scripts as we went along, I wasn't ever sure how much of Russia we were going to see. So that was a huge kind of learning curve and quite fascinating. And I did try then to bring in some of the, I suppose, patterns and the strength of colour of the fabrics and textiles that were in Russia general into the court, because the court at that time was actually predominantly French fashion or German fashion. It was European, really. They weren't wearing traditional Russian clothing in any way.
Right. That's really interesting. The other, as you mentioned, like, obviously another thing for this season is that Catherine is pregnant in this season. So you have to do a lot of different, I would like, baby bumps or like, different belly sizes, I guess. And how did that affect, your costuming for that? And like, how did you like kind of work with that and work with Elle obviously on it as well?
Well, it was almost sort of just over 9 months filming, and she was like pregnant the whole time, different. And we shot it in kind of in blocks so that she didn't go backwards and forwards to different sizes, which was a good job. That was quite complex actually, because the 18th century woman's shape is a tiny waist and a big skirt, and what we'd got was a diminishing waist and an 18th century waist is long, so that you've got that kind of shape at the front. And of course we were losing that because the baby bump was coming up higher and higher, so Catherine's waistline was disappearing and it was moving up higher, which was it took quite a lot of toiles and on each baby bump to kind of make sure that we didn't completely lose the period and end up sort of in 1820 or something with a high waistline. We also really had to keep Elle herself comfortable, which means that she didn't want to kind of be this just massive shape moving through court. So there was a lot of work went into making sure that when she was shot from the back, her rib cage and her shoulders still stayed quite tiny. I didn't build up the sides of her skirts too much, because that then meant she was building up at the front and building up at the sides. So there was lots of playing with her shape, really. I actually, I think about episode 8, she's sort of 7 and 8, she's at her biggest. And then I could let go of the waist, which was actually a relief, because it was quite difficult working with it moving up. And then the minute that we got into the soft shapes, they became themselves quite mid-18th century, because there was a lot of loose shapes around then. It's just that they're not great on camera for us. It becomes too billowing. But in actual fact, when she got to sort of 9 months, and we used much softer fabrics, and that's where I refer to quite a lot of sort of contemporary fashion, actually, and sort of, I don't know, sort of 60s, early 60s Balenciaga or something, where you have these lovely taffeta sort of ballooning shapes, and they're very similar to paintings of the time of women relaxing.
Right. Yeah, that's really fascinating. Was there, I mean, it sounds like maybe yes. Was there, because of like the challenges of it, were there like ideas and stuff that you had that just wouldn't work because of the bump and stuff that you had to like just scrap or like for
Yeah, we didn't sort of, it wasn't so much, yeah, there was things that, I mean, the bump itself, for a while we used the bump, and we had a maternity corset made to go over the top. And that wasn't working because it wasn't a real pregnancy. So unfortunately, the sort of the corset was moving around, and we couldn't stop it moving around. But Elle needed the corset because it's good for your posture in that period, and also it creates a framework under the costumes. Rather than boning the costumes, you've got the boned body. So we reversed it, and that helped. But for probably, there's a short period in episode 1 where we hadn't got that, and it wasn't quite working, and the bump was moving because it was, I mean, it's attached, but it's only attached elastically so that she can move, and because she's a very physical, it's a physical part, and she's she's a physical actress, and she's moving in a 20th century way, so. Or
yeah, a lot of challenges there. I want to ask you just about also about Peter Nicholas Holt. His look, I just think is like really fun. I know he was. I saw. I think at TCA talked about how much he enjoyed the baby shower, the costume for that. Can you talk about like that? I guess can you talk about that costume and just in general his look and how you kind of evolved it from what it was in season 1 to what it is in season 2?
I think he gets, because he's been deposed, he's got quite a lot more free time. So we very much played with the idea of him kind of being a little bit more relaxed. So because he doesn't, and there's a few occasions where he has to put on pomp and ceremony. And Nick himself quite liked to get in touch with Peter's feminine side. So the idea, I think, is that he's such a sort of handsome, masculine kind of maverick that you can put, and I did put some sort of chiffons and quite feminine fabrics on him and frills. I kept the colours still quite dark, so he still stays in that sort of, I don't know, a little bit rock genre, and metallics and things, but we softened up some of the fabrics, and he's quite often underdressed rather than overdressed. And the baby shower, that was a kind of a group effort actually between myself and Lou, who did the hair and makeup, and Francesca, to play with the idea of a baby shower so that everybody's in these sort of baby colours, and it's generally a fancy dress, of which there was quite a few in the Russian court. I think in most courts it was very fashionable in the mid 18th century. And Nick, we did panniers on him, so he's, it's basically based on French opera costumes of the time. So very, very short mini prin, I think I'd call it, and a very, very big feathered hat.
That's great.
We kept the animal print going. It's just that it's all it's paler and. Yeah. I think everybody, I think my whole team would say that was their favourite section to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it shows too when people get to see it as well. Sharon Long, costume designer for The Great on Hulu, season 2. Thank you so much, Sharon.
Thank you.
Shiona Turini, costume designer for Insecure, follows the awkward experiences and racy tribulations of a modern-day African-American woman. It's a synopsis, but it's a final season on HBO now. This is the 5th and final season. Shiona, I guess for you, what were your overall goals for the costumes for this season and coming into it as you're wrapping it up?
It was really exciting to work on the final season. I actually joined the show midway through season 3. So I had a unique challenge, but I started actually at the perfect time because it was a time period where the characters were all evolving and kind of stepping into new versions of themselves. So I was able to make more changes than I expected. And for the final season, we went into it really wanting to go out with a bang and kind of elevate the girls. Like they're finally kind of getting it together and they've had all these life experiences together and they're maybe separating a bit, but they have found a stride and they're getting to know themselves a lot better. And with that, their style has evolved. For Issa, who has been casual for most of the series, she really wanted to show what would grown-up Issa look like. What would someone who finally, after like all of this hard work, is like becoming this established, confident woman look like? What would she wear? And for the other characters, I got to play around a bit and present some ideas and got to experiment a lot in their style and how it's reflecting where they are in their lives.
So that's really cool, and I think it's really apparent. And I knew you had started in 2018, and one of the things I was like, what you said is very true. But do you have like before coming in, and even I guess before this season too, how much conversation do you have with like Issa and them about what they think of the characters, and how much do you try to like really get to what the actors are thinking as you're kind of thinking of their costumes, I guess, for the characters?
Issa's really involved, which is can present some challenges because, she's a producer, she's the writer, she's the creator, and she's the star of the show. And so she is really involved, and she most of the time comes into it with an idea of what she wants, but her background isn't in clothes or fashion or styling and costuming. And so she still is really open and collaborative. For the other characters, she is a lot more flexible with ideas like, what should we do? Or what are you thinking? And at the start of the season, I made mood boards about where I saw each character starting from episode 1 and where we'll end by episode 10. For each script, I usually meet with Issa first because, again, I know that she has some sort of idea already. And just to make sure that she and I are on the same page, and I'll present my boards for the episode, just ideas that I've had, costumes from other fittings. And I try and start with her because she has a lot of input on what her character will wear. And then I work the other characters around Issa.
That's interesting and really cool. I think it comes across really well. I know you've talked about this before, and I know it's like a big part of the show is how you kind of want to you use Black designers, you highlight Black designers and kind of elevate them. Can you talk about, what that means professionally for you, but also like personally as well, I guess, and like how getting to do that on a show that's as high profile as Insecure?
That's a great question. I feel like we have this enormous platform, and so we have this social responsibility to kind of support young emerging designers and brands that wouldn't really have the space and the platform on their own, and also just included in other shows in this way. They're not always top of mind or on people's radar. And so my team and I, we make sure to include Black designers in every single episode. It is a huge priority, not just for myself, but because these characters, I do believe, would really be, it's rooted kind of in reality. They would be supporting these designers. They'd be wearing clothing made by their friends. They'll be searching out local LA brands and small brands. And so I make sure that that's represented. And I've seen how it has helped small designers, Black designers, and it's incredible. I feel like we are helping someone's career and changing the trajectory of their brands, and it's amazing to collaborate in that way and to support Black designers in that way.
Yeah, it's really cool. I assume that's definitely going to be one of the legacies that I think people take from the show, and I'm sure that you hope people take from the show. But what else are you from as the show's wrapping up? What are your what are your hopes of the people, the legacies of the costumes and the way the characters have evolved, I guess, as well, and their looks?
I remember growing up and watching shows, and especially watching Black shows and School Days and Living Single, and wanting to dress like these characters, wanting to live like these characters, and seeing a little bit of myself reflected on screen. And it was so important. And so I do hope that one of the legacies that we leave is that everyone that watched the show felt really supported and held and loved and represented in a way that we don't get a lot in television, or just get a lot in film or television, actually. So I love working on this show because we are also kind of a part of creating this like time capsule of all of the things that are relevant in our community right now. On our last episode, we had to create a fashion show, of course. And we decided to custom the show with a young Black designer who's one of the first Black designers that's been invited to recently show in couture during the couture fashion show calendar. And so this character wasn't based on the designer, but there was a little bit of overlap. And so being able to kind of cement his special moment in time by way of the show was pretty major and very impactful. And I just hope that one of the legacies left is that people feel seen and supported on camera, and we're able to do that in a beautiful and iconic way.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned I wanted to ask you about too. So like the show is super contemporary, obviously, like you said, and like I think it's very much plugged into like what people like are talking about, right? Or just like in general experience things. And like I guess so. How do you make sure like is there a pressure, I guess, or like you don't want people to watch it and be like, oh, that looks bogus or whatever. So how do you is that like added pressure knowing that like the audience, especially for Insecure, is going to be like so in tune to like the culture, and especially because it's so contemporary, I guess. Like, how does that affect your costume designing at all?
I try and let the costuming reflect what's relevant right now, but I also try to help find like what's the next big thing, So it's like one of the big moments last season was we had Issa carry a Telfar bag, and in like editorial fashion and in New York City, they had named it the Brooklyn Birkin. It's like really interesting tagline for this bag. And while a small community or a really in the know fashion community knew about this brand, it wasn't as massive as it now is. And I made sure that Issa carried it multiple times because that's what I feel like people do. They're not changing their bag every costume or every outfit in real life. And so this season, one of the conversations was like, how do we top that? And so I was like, it's really just about kind of searching for the next designer. It's kind of like a treasure hunt. Like, what do I think is going to be great? And it's worked so far. It's we've been able to kind of stay ahead of the curve while making sure that the show still is like super relevant and contemporary, and reflecting like the great things that are happening in fashion right now.
Yeah, it's really, I think that's really interesting. It's like incredible to toe that line and like really kind of like make it work so well. Is like, I think it's like really special. It's one of the things I really like about the show. I'm a total fashion Luddite, but I was like, oh, it definitely is cool. I think you could tell that it is very relevant and also like kind of cutting edge as well. Shiona Turini, costume designer for Insecure. The final season is airing now on HBO. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Isis Mussenden, costume designer for Wheel of Time, set in a high fantasy world where magic exists, but only some can access it. A woman named Moraine crosses paths with 5 young men and women. This sparks a dangerous, world-spanning journey. It's coming to Amazon Prime Video in November here. It's obviously based on an incredibly popular book series. Isis, what was your experience like coming in? Were you aware of the books, and like where did you start, I guess?
No, I wasn't aware of the books at all. And I actually, when I got the scripts and went in for the interview, I said, I cannot make sense of any of this right now. So let's just talk about the way I work, because it was so difficult and in depth. And I couldn't even pronounce the names of 50% of the characters, and nobody can. As everybody came into the show, after me, each person, we had like a little tutorial on how to even pronounce most of the names in the story. But I was lucky enough that when I got the job, I had a crash course from a super fan, Sarah Nakamura, who is our researcher and our everything that anybody needs to know about Wheel of Time. So she sat down with me, and I had several sessions. It was like a little, crash course in Wheel of Time, so that I could absorb it quickly, because there are 13 books and there was no time to read it. But also, as others have said today, it is the script that we're shooting that we need to design. So I became the audience that doesn't know the books. And that needs to make sense too. Those scripts need to make sense. So no, I did not know the books.
No, that's really fascinating. I think that makes probably, like, I think we've talked about in other rooms of these too. Like, it gives you a different perspective that I think maybe helps, especially like with the creativity of the costumes and the originality, I guess, and what you're trying to do.
Yes. I mean, it's nice to get, you need the references, because we also, we have to honor the story. Our showrunner, Rafe Judkins, is brilliant. He knows the stories inside out. So he knew where we wanted to push and make sure we gave a nod to the story and to the fans. And he knew where it wasn't as important for him. So he was my barometer in that way. Otherwise, he just kind of let me go. And I designed to service the story. I designed to service the characters. But conceptually, it was quite intense at the beginning, because I really just needed to get a grasp of this world. Because if I don't understand the world, I can't live in the world. And I did, break it down between the Ajas and the channeling and the Aes Sedai and the cultures and the tribes and the armies. And we started with a map that we created ourselves. My design assistant, Gypsy Taylor, brilliant, drew it up, and we color coded it because we're dyslexic and we need color. And, we had to do that ourselves so that we could so we could live in this world for the next 2 years, basically.
Yeah, it's wild. I was going to ask you about the length of time. It's obviously, it is such a long production, the 2 years. It is fascinating.
I think everybody here today, the COVID situation, we did have 2 stops, and it took us, 2 years and 2 weeks to shoot 8 episodes because of COVID. And because, also it was a massive undertaking.
It really is a massive show. I think that's like apparent from like when you watch like the first episode. It's just like so big. I guess, I've seen people like, obviously like comp points for the books and like maybe like a Lord of the Rings or a Game of Thrones. But I think a big difference from this show is that it is like, if not a matriarchal society, largely, like obviously like women have such power in this society that's in the show. And I think getting to see that as in the fantasy genre is unique. And I guess, how did you make that work in the costumes, and how did that change like how you kind of costumed a lot of these characters?
Well, the women are very strong, and it's a matriarchal society. They can channel. They are the only ones that are allowed to channel, but they also are not princesses. These women are working women. The women of the White Tower, of the 7 Ajas, which is 7 colors of the shawl. So there are definitely things from the book. There are definite clues that I needed to follow. So in designing these women, we started shooting in another place. So we had a little time to kind of sneak into who these women were. And at first, I really did think that they were going to be more like princesses, or, more stylized in a way. But the color itself, these 7 colors that we were bound by, was enough. Believe me. I mean, they're not easy. And if you think of a lot of these fantasy and medieval shows, they're very brown or dark or monotone or sepia, beautiful. That's not our show, because we have 7 colors. We have cultures, everything from the White Cloaks, who are completely white, to the Tinkers, who have multicolors and pinks and textures and patterns and all of that. So that's one big difference of our show, is that we have a lot of color, which is, fine by me. I love working in color. We had a lot of textile. I had a beautiful textile design team who worked with me to create and to control all that. So it's a build show. I mean, you can't go to the store and buy fantasy or go to the costume shop and pull it. But that's kind of where we are with that.
Yeah, you talked earlier, and I think I saw you. I watched an interview you did for Chronicles of Narnia, which I know you worked on the costumes for that, and you talked about how it's the relation between the actors and the costume designer is so intertwined, and that you're trying to like tell the story through the character. And can you talk a little about working with Rosamund in this, and like how you for Moiraine, what your conversations were like, and how you kind of wanted to make that her look, while obviously, like you said, like paying fidelity to the source, but how you kind of wanted to imagine that and envision that with her, I guess.
Sure. First of all, I was lucky enough to be working with Rosamund Pike. I mean, she is a fashion icon. She's also a brilliant actress. And so what we're trying to do in the fitting room always is find the character. It is always about the character. You find a good actor is talking about character. They're not talking about themselves. So she was a brilliant collaborator, and I really respect her opinion. And I think together we worked really well to find that higher ground of Moiraine's look. Moiraine her character is of the Blue Aja, which is the investigators. And we find her at the beginning. We start at the beginning with her a long journey. She's already been on a long journey. We come into the story after a long journey in the process. And so there's a reality we wanted to lay there. That was kind of what I was speaking of, where these girls aren't princesses. They're working, they're hardworking, and they're really trying to make the world and keep the world safe and better. So we needed to honor her blue. And I went and found the first thing that came to my mind when I started working on her costumes was Picasso's blue period paintings, because they are so stunning and beautiful. I saw them in person in Barcelona years ago, and I never could get them out of my head. So we pulled up the paintings and we laid them out. We printed them out in high res. We started pulling blues. If it works in the painting, it's going to work on the body. If the scale of this light blue to this dark blue to this pattern works, then it's going to work in a costume. For me, I work that way. So on top of it, we layered motifs onto all the different cultures. And her character's culture is from Cairene. And Cairene is the women dressed a little 18th century French. And so we had the blue, and we had the French influence, and we had the shibori, which was the Japanese textile design that we gave the Cairene. So mixing all these three together, then we started to work on silhouettes. So working with Rosamund, she's got a terrific figure, and she's very tall. I actually have the tallest cast I've ever worked with. Everybody was tall. The women were tall. The men were all 6'4". It was brilliant because, I mean, I had a lot of canvas to deal with, and I just love it because height also helps me with costume, and they were all tall. So Rosamund and I worked, together to make Moiraine real. Moiraine had to be accessible and real. We couldn't put her on a pedestal. We needed to feel for her and be with her on this journey.
Yeah, it's really great. I honestly did notice the height because she is so tall. I'm like, oh, they all look very, very tall.
All tall. It was fantastic. And I mean, maybe that was the brilliant casting director. I mean, I think they're all great actors, so I think that was first. But they just happened to all be tall, which is great. And
I guess briefly, I mean, was there for you, like, in the show, what was the most most exciting costume maybe for you to bring to fruition, I guess? Or was there, anything that you were like, oh, I'm really excited that this paid off so well in the final version?
Because it's so varied, because we did 5 cultures and 6 armies and a tribe and all these day play. I mean, it just went on and on. So every block we had a whole new culture to start with. And each time we would say, oh, this is our favorite. Oh, no, this is my favorite. Oh, no, I like this one now. So each time we moved through the story, we definitely kind of had a lot of fun right till the end. One of the groups, it's actually an army, it's called the White Cloaks. It's a little controversial, the White Cloaks, because you're not really sure if they're good or evil. They think they're good. Are they good? We don't know. And they wear white in the forest, and they kind of don't really battle well. And they're zealots, and they're a bit righteous, and they're witch hunters. And so it was a real mix and mash of different ideas of what the White Cloaks were, and they were cloaks. And so then I saw the White Cloaks. That's kind of like the Knights of Templar. So I didn't want to like shroud them in cloaks. Even though I feel they're a little clannish, I didn't want it to look like the clan. So it was a real tricky one. We went through a lot of versions. So I ended up putting a cloak and a cape together, kind of a mantle cape to create this, because they are on the horses, and you could see them move as they were riding their horses. Little ecclesiastic garb, because they're a little bit religious. They call themselves the children of the light. White Cloaks is actually a derogatory name for them. And then we took 380 meters of this fabric, because white was just too white, and we lightly printed chainmail on them. All the fabric is printed in chainmail. They're not wearing chainmail because they're not battling. They're wearing a little bit of armor, not full armor. That could come maybe another time. But yeah, I was really, when they're all in the forest and they're all around and they came out on their horses, it was quite striking. So I was very happy with that.
Yeah, I've seen some of that episode. Is really cool, and it is a very striking sequence, especially like you said, like having the white in the forest, in the environment. It's just like, it looks so cool on camera. So I think that's a great job on those costumes.
Thank
really
you.
Cool. Isis Mussenden, costume designer for Wheel of Time on Amazon Prime Video this month. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris.
Jane Holland, costume designer for Cowboy Bebop. Eimer Ni Mhaoldomhnaigh, costume designer for Foundation. Sharon Long, costume designer for The Great. Shiona Turini, costume designer for Insecure. And Isis Mussenden, costume designer for Wheel of Time. Thank you all so much for doing this here. I wanted to start, I'd love to hear from all of you maybe about the motivating factor that you had to become costume designers, that you're obviously all like, you have such great experience in all these different varied projects. And I'd just be so interested to hear that. Shiona, I'd love to start with you, and then we could, wrap around.
My background is actually in editorial styling. So when I moved to New York from Bermuda because I wanted to work in fashion, and I started in magazines. So I was at Teen Vogue, Cosmo, W Magazine, and I worked in that capacity for, I think, almost 15 years. And then I started to do music videos. And when I started to do music videos, that's when I started to meet different directors and collaborators in that way. And I actually got a call to see if I would be interested in costume design. So it was, and I was. It wasn't ever the goal when I was younger. I knew that I wanted to work with clothes. I knew I wanted to tell stories through clothing. And I was very open to different challenges and different ways to communicate and to explore and express myself, whether it was editorial, red carpet, music videos, and now costume design. So I am still learning, and I love it, and I'm very open to many different challenges, and that's how I got here. And Insecure was my first opportunity to costume design.
Wow, that's amazing. Isis, how about you? What made you want to do this for a career?
Well, I actually grew up in Hollywood. As a kid, I had no connection to the film business, but they always were shooting movies around us. And then I'm the only daughter of 5. So my mother used to sew all my clothes, and she taught me to sew when I was younger. And movies were just big in our house. Every Christmas Day was, let's go see the best, the new movie coming out. This is what we did. We ended up 4 of us in the film business out of 5. So, it was kind of just a natural thing. I knew very young that I wanted to be a costume designer. When I was 15, I said to a friend on a movie, that's going to be me someday, because it was organic. It was like making clothes, telling stories, and just watching the film business around me. I wanted to be part of it.
Eimer, how about yourself? Where did you start? Or what made you want to get into it?
I studied fashion at college, and I worked for a while as a fashion designer, but I didn't know that you could work in film. I mean, it was just something very exotic, and, there wasn't really, I'm from Ireland, and I live near Dublin, and, when I started, make myself sound really old now, but there wasn't really a much of a film industry here, and I went to live in Madrid, and I made some friends who were film students, and I just started helping them, and also fell in love with Pedro Almodovar's films, and I could just really see that costuming, and also Almodovar was writing films with incredible roles for women long before it was ever fashionable, or long before it was ever talked about. And it really struck a chord with me. And also some of the women, they were older women, they were glamorous, they were strong, they were opinionated, and I was just completely hooked when I saw that. And when I came back to Ireland, the film industry was really just kind of taking off then. And, I just was in the right place at the right time, and I'm still here. So that's it.
That's great. And Sharon, how about yourself?
Well, I have to say, a bit like Eimer, I didn't really think that you could just go into films and be a costume designer. I wanted to do fashion, and I've just always had a love of clothes and history, but I ended up doing illustration at college, and then I became a fashion illustrator for quite a while, and eventually moved, as I was working in fashion as an illustrator, I kind of moved slightly across into styling, and fortuitously, I got a job on The Cook, his wife and her lover, and it was because it was Gaultier designing it, and they wanted fashion people, not film people. And the minute that I started doing it, that was the world that I wanted to belong in. It was just a long route round, I always think, because I did, when I at first think that I wanted to go to college to do theatre. But funnily enough, theatre, I have never worked in theatre, and it has never completely appealed to me. But film and TV does. I don't know why. I mean, obviously, a lot of people bridge all of the different disciplines.
Yeah,
and then I've worked slowly. I mean, I've worked in most positions in the department, so it's kind of in a slow journey.
Yeah. That's great. And Jane, last but not least, certainly, how about yourself?
Oh my gosh, the Cook, the Thief, his wife and her lover. I mean, I think that was a film that I saw, and it just, I mean, it really is a magic and extraordinary costume experience. I remember that really clearly.
It was quite interesting at the time. I was just doing crowd.
Fantastic. I mean, it really, I remember it so clearly. It really resonated. I think costume found me is really what happened. At university, I studied science, and I did English and drama because really that was my kind of interest and passion. And it took me a while to realise that you can follow your passion. So I did postgrad drama. Really, theatre was the thing that I knew about because I'm from New Zealand, and similar to Ireland, probably our industry was quite small. So I kind of found that there was a film industry by being in a television commercial and kind of looking around and going, I feel like I belong here, and talking to people behind the scenes. So I ended up working. I was always a maker, so I ended up, sort of working on set The piano was pivotal for me. I was the on-set standby on piano, which was an extraordinary film for the design of it, but also just the actual sort of process of making. And once I had done that job, it was like that was the ultimate that I could ever do on set, and that was time for me to kind of move into the design realm. And I went to Australia, to the Australian Film, Television and Radio School, and from there just sort of, gathered my craft. It comes from people, it comes from character, I'm a traveller. I love different cultures. I'm an immigrant. My kids are Māori. There's like a real sort of like interest in people and culture and expression and identity. And that's why costume is the thing that I ended up in, I think. And, character as well, obviously.
Right. Listen, all of you are so incredible, and unfortunately we do have to wrap up because we're out of time, but I just want to thank you all again for doing this. And once again, Jane Holland for Cowboy Bebop, Eimer Ni Mhaoldomhnaigh for Foundation, Sharon Long for The Great, Shiona Turini for Insecure, and Isis Mussenden for The Wheel of Time. All great shows. Thank you again for doing this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.